Today on Paul's Old Crap, we're going to take a look at Windows NT on this suspiciously boring-looking PC. You may assume this is an x86-based PC, but it actually runs on PowerPC. Before we take a tour of the hardware, we should take a look at how this system came about in the first place. The 1990s were a magical era for computing, as new technologies and ideas were shaking things up. A couple of these ideas include the PowerPC Reference Platform and the Common Hardware Reference Platform. While these never really caught on, it did provide us with some interesting hardware and brief operating system support in Windows NT and Solaris. As interest in a common standard died off, IBM would go on to continue making PowerPC systems with AIX, and Apple, of course, would continue with their Power Macintosh platform, both being completely incompatible with each other. The board we're looking at today is called the Motorola Atlas and appears to be part of the PowerPC Reference Platform design. Okay, so the board we're going to talk about today, this is the Motorola Atlas. It is a PowerPC-based board, and I don't really have a whole lot of information about this. It took a while for me to actually figure out what this board really was. I've had this in my collection for almost 20 years now, and I'm not entirely sure how I actually got it in the first place, but I've never been able to make it work until I think it was sometime around a year or two ago, and I managed to make this thing work for the first time. And at that point, I did a bunch of research trying to figure out what it was. And yeah, as far as I can tell, this is part of the PowerPC Reference Platform. And if we look at the copyright date on here, so it's got Motorola and then 1995. Now, later in 1995, Motorola did start up their own PowerPC-based desktop computer. And it wasn't a Mac clone. It was called the Motorola PowerStack. And it was the same type of idea. It would be basically just kind of like a PC, but with a PowerPC. And it would run certain operating systems such as Windows NT had a PowerPC port. And I believe you could also make it run like the PowerPC version of Solaris. There was only one version that did that. And I think AIX was another option. So this board, it predates the Motorola PowerStack, and it's all it has is this standard AT plug on there. And the PowerStack boards have they had their own ports on there. It was basically a full setup in the case, and this was meant to fit AT cases, which I think was kind of odd for this type of board with a PowerPC processor. And when I look up the information about the Motorola Atlas, there are some differences. So I think I found a copy of the manual, which shows like PS2 ports, which this does not have, although it does actually say PS2 mouse on here. But it doesn't have the port, which I found to be a little confusing. And it does actually have a PS2 keyboard written on here too. So because this is just the AT and all of the PowerStack boards, I believe, used PS2, I'm kind of wondering if this was like some sort of early development board. When I look at the manual for the Motorola Atlas, which is what I believe this board is, it doesn't really say AT, I don't think. I think it actually references PS2 ports. So I'm kind of wondering if this was one of the early PowerPC boards made by Motorola to try and to follow that PowerPC Reference Platform spec. So yeah, it's I don't know. It was kind of confusing, and I still don't know completely how this thing is supposed to work with some of the hardware. So the RAM, I think this is one of the problems I had. I could never get this thing to actually post with video, and I wasn't sure if it was the video card I was trying to use or possibly the RAM. So what I've got here, it uses 72-pin RAM, and this particular RAM is non-parity. Otherwise, I think you'd find like another chip right in the middle there. But this is fast page mode memory, so it's got FPM on there, and I do have matching pair. And with this, as well as this Cirrus Logic PCI video card, the Cirrus Logic chip that it's using, it's the 5400 series. This is probably the only card out of like the 20 or 30 odd PCI cards I tried in this thing. And this plus that RAM there, that hardware combination was the first time I managed to get this thing to actually post. And I don't know if maybe I was just trying the wrong hardware combination or what, but I did manage to get this thing running. Now, for this board, I always wanted to use Windows NT on PowerPC. I didn't really care about trying to get AIX working or that one version of PowerPC Solaris. So what I did do is I flashed the firmware on here with the Motorola firmware that's designed to run Windows NT. The original firmware on this board, it's got these two chips here, which there's actually this little label on there that says PowerPC 1.5, and I think that would mean that it was referencing the original firmware that was on this board when I fired it up. It was called PowerPC Bug or something like that, and that's the command line firmware that I think was designed for use with AIX or Solaris. And I did manage to find some instructions and a firmware image from an old archive of the Motorola site to get my chips flashed with the one that would handle Windows NT. So that's what I did, and I don't know if there's really any going back. I don't have any intention of doing that, but I think if I found an old firmware image, I could probably reflash those chips and get it back to where it was before. But it was a lot of work involved to get this thing to run Windows NT, so I think that's where I'm going to leave it. If we take a little tour of the board, this is pretty much the same as what you'd find on, let's say, for example, a Socket 7 Pentium or something like that you might encounter around this era, although I think we might have been into like Pentium 2s by that point. I'm not entirely sure. So we already did look at the fact that it's got the AT plug on there, and it's also the AT style power. So I've just got a standard PC case that actually came originally with a Pentium board, and when I put this in there, I just hooked up the power, same as you would with a normal PC board. And it also gives you, like, we've got these serial plugs here for your external serial ports. This here is, what was this? Oh, this is for your floppy drive. So a PC floppy is what this is compatible with. It gives us parallel port if you really want that. And then we've also got the onboard IDE interface. And this is what I'm using. I've got like an old spinning disk IDE hard drive, and that works no problem. But interestingly enough, this also does include onboard SCSI. And I haven't tested this at all, mainly because I don't really have any old SCSI drives that still work reliably. But the chip that it's got over here, this is like the NCR chip, and I think that is actually the SCSI chip on there. So it's an option on the board. I haven't tested it yet. I'm not even sure if it's going to be available with the what the firmware I'm running, but I think Windows NT may have detected it. Yeah, I can't really remember, but one really neat feature though. So this has a dead clock chip, which is what this is right here. Sometimes when you have these chips, some look removable and some are just soldered completely in. This one is kind of new. I have never actually seen this type before. You can pull this off, and it's got this weird type of connection. There's 4 little leads on the inside there, and they plug directly into this chip. And that's the first time I've seen something like this. And I guess if I tried hard enough, I could probably find a replacement of this chip. This is just called the Timekeeper. So lithium battery. Yeah. I figure at some point I'll try to find a replacement of that and swap it in there. But Yeah, it still operates with the dead clock battery. It's kind of annoying in the different steps you have to take because without the clock battery on there, it basically forgets all your settings in the firmware. So that's something we'll go over later in this video, how to deal with using this with a dead clock battery. But if we move on, as we mentioned before, it uses 72-pin RAM, and it includes 4 slots, and best I can tell, you have to use it in pairs. So minimum 2 sticks required is my assumption there. We do have a couple other plugs here. We've got like an abort and reset switch. I have no idea what the purpose of these would be, but those are little switches there. But then we've also got the same, like I guess these little header things or whatever for your case lights and stuff like that. So we've got like somewhere in here we've got the reset switch, and I think we've got power LED, or yeah, it looks like the power LED in there. We've got key lock over here. I think this is the PC speaker, and then we've got a fan. So I do have a chassis fan that I have in my PC case, and it's right near where the CPU is because the CPU doesn't actually have a fan attached to it. Normally, obviously, it does have a heatsink, but this is the IBM PowerPC 604. So normally, yes, you would have a heatsink on there, and it's the same kind of heatsink that you actually find on some of the Power Macs at the time. So this looks like it's the exact same heatsink as on a Power Mac 6100. It's got these 4 little clamps that just lock in place. Yeah, and this is a 604, whereas the Power Mac would be running a 601 processor. And the physical size of this is actually smaller than the entire PowerPC 601. Now, if I look around the edges here, like all these, I don't know how to describe it, but you see there's a noticeable box here. And the CPU is quite small in that spot. And there's this yellow line that kind of runs along there as well around it. That is more the size of the PowerPC 601. So it makes me wonder if this board was originally going to run the PowerPC 601 instead of the 604. Or maybe if the PCB was meant to run both of those as a possibility. And this particular version just happens to be the 604. Now, if we look at the manual for the Motorola Atlas, it does say there's like PowerPC 603 and 603E versions. So that might be a possibility as to why they have that like larger available area for the processor. But that is just an assumption. I don't really know. I'm basically just guessing. This at the bottom here. This is some sort of proprietary cache slot. I have no idea what fits this. It's quite likely I'll never find something that actually fits in this spot, although I am keeping an eye out for random cache chips and cards and stuff like that. So, this is a Motorola chip here. I really have no idea what it does, so yeah. But then over here we have the Intel PCI chip. So I guess that'd be for your PCI slots here, which you can barely even see because the board is out of view. Below that we've got, I have no idea what this is. It says award on there, I think. Yeah, I'm not sure. But yeah, we already really looked at the SCSI chip there. Most everything else on this on the board is probably standard stuff you'd expect on a PC board. But yeah, on that note, we do have 3 PCI slots and 4 slots here that I'm assuming are just standard ISA. I've never actually seen a board up close that had eISA, so I'm not too sure if that's what these are or not. I haven't done too much testing with this, but if I had to guess, I would say ISA is probably what those are. So, and it's got this other plug here. I don't know what the purpose of this. It looks like an additional power plug, although I don't have anything connected to this when I'm running the system. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. So if we talk about the available operating systems for this board, Windows NT 4.0 is pretty much the only version of Windows that supports the PowerPC, and I believe it went up to Service Pack 4, I think was the last that supported PowerPC, among other technologies as well. I think they took out MIPS support right around that point, so... but yeah, this board is, I'm pretty sure, capable of running the PowerPC AIX operating system. And I did initially test this with the old firmware, getting the boot disk for Solaris version 2.5.1, which was, as far as I know, the only PowerPC release of Solaris. And with the original firmware that was on those chips, I was able to boot the Solaris boot disk just as an experiment. Although I was always going to be running Windows NT on here, so I didn't really go any further with that. Now, there is a unreleased version of OS2 for PowerPC, which I wouldn't mind testing on this thing, although I kind of doubt it would ever run. That would be more of an IBM specific thing, and from what I understand, the PowerPC port of OS2 would only run on a very few number of IBM models, and then that was, I guess, before they decided they're just going to keep on going with AIX on the PowerPCs and stuff like that. I believe there's probably going to be some very limited support for operating systems such as Debian Linux or NetBSD. If I'm not mistaken, those are probably the only two that would have support for these old PReP boards, right? So, but yeah, as I said earlier, I had no intention of running that sort of operating system. Windows NT is what I really want to get running on this thing. So because this is designed to be part of the PowerPC Reference Platform, and I believe one of the main goals of that was to make this a real compatible board with other PCs, the way all of the holes on the board line up, it basically fits into the same standard AT style case that you would find with any normal PC, and that's what we have here. This is basically just a standard AT case. It's even got the old DTK computer on there. This was a Pentium 166 that I bought on eBay, and I actually bought it specifically for the case because I needed an AT case. So all of the other stuff in here, the ports, all of the board components like the plugs for the switches and all that stuff, it all works automatically. This was... it basically is a PC that happens to run the PowerPC processor, which is a very neat thing about this. I find that the other types of systems from, say, for example, Motorola, they were all custom designed. So it wasn't just like an AT plug on there. They had all of their own ports, and you had to use the board in their own case. It was all like proprietary. It wasn't meant to be kind of like a PC clone like this. So yeah, having this with a PowerPC processor is definitely a nice appeal to this thing. And I think that's what makes this one of the more rare items in my entire collection. I've not seen anything like this anywhere else. And yeah, I don't expect I'll find a whole lot of stuff like this. All right, so now we're going to power up the system with my capture card connected. So it'll just briefly show a bit of information, and then it flashes over to the fact that our clock battery is dead. NVRAM is out of date, blah, blah, blah. Sure. So now that we've booted into the firmware, you can see up here we've got so it says Motorola PowerPC firmware version 3.04, Motorola RISC software. So this firmware, I think this was originally for the Power Stack because, let's see here. These are just No, I don't need those. I've actually forgotten where I saw the original options, but yeah, this basically, it reads my system as a power stack, even though this is not a power stack computer. But I think it also knows that it's the PowerPC Reference Platform type system because it's got this PReP partition type reference in there. Yeah, immediately this basically shows up because it doesn't know what to do. There's some embedded programs in here, run FDOS. This is what I had to do. I was in here to do the original flashing of the firmware. And what is it doing now? It may have just locked up on me. Mouse no longer moves. So yeah, I was in here and I think it's trying to read something off my floppy disk. Yeah. But yeah, this is where we did the flashing of the firmware. I may have to escape out of this. Okay, so I had to reboot the computer. Seemed to lock up waiting for that thing. One thing I did notice, though, the actual main firmware application here, when you minimize it, I noticed the icon here. It's kind of weird. This is like, if I'm not mistaken, this is like the all-seeing eye, or whatever the hell it's actually called. That's kind of a strange thing to find on a Motorola firmware, but yeah. Anyway, so it does also have, like, we've got this, the ARC system, but there's nothing relevant being shown in there. And then the debug screen had nothing except that. Yeah, nothing interesting there. So basically everything happens in our firmware menu here. These are default bootloader items, but I don't think we're going to be using these. I'm not sure, no. We're going to be doing Express Setup, which is specifically for Windows NT. Before we do that, though, we need to actually partition our hard drive. So I've got a blank hard drive in here. We're going to go to Hard Disk Setup. And if we... there's one partition left on here I need to delete. Yes, that one there. Are you sure? Yes. Partition deleted. So we want to start off with a blank hard drive with nothing on there. So if we go to Show Partitions, there's nothing on there. It's, select an item. Oops. Click too many damn times. All right. So this is where the tricky part is. We need to partition this hard drive properly. And when you see things like create PowerPC boot partition, you don't want to use this. Even though you are making a boot partition, you don't want to use the one that says boot partition because apparently that makes too much sense. No, what you want to do is create a fat partition. And also, what you need to do is make this one 10 megabytes. And well, we'll get into this as we proceed with this, but we're only making one partition of 10 megs. That's the actual boot partition for Windows, and we're not creating the partition that Windows will actually sit on just yet. So 10 megs, click OK. Partition created, successfully created. Yes, OK. Do you want to make this system partition? You know what? Okay, my instructions say that yes, we do need to make this the system partition. I'm assuming this is kind of like the equivalent of a boot partition, so yeah. This might be irrelevant. We're going to find out. Oh, okay. Well, now it's formatting that partition, so that might be okay. We'll just wait for this to finish. All right, so the formatting is done. Let's click OK. Let's just show the partitions. Okay, well, it comes out as 16, good enough. We're going to exit. And okay, so what I've got the Windows NT 4 CD in my CD-ROM drive. Windows NT 4, the original release, will have the PowerPC version on there, as well as the x86, I think the MIPS, and the alpha stuff. So it should be ready for us to boot off of that. And what we do is we go to the Express setup here. And I'm hoping this picks up my CD-ROM drive. Oh yeah, there we go. Windows NT setup. So I can actually hear the CD-ROM drive working right now. And what we're seeing on the screen here is kind of familiar. And this is kind of interesting because normally this would be running off of itself when you boot off of the CD, or on some of these older systems, I think you need a helper floppy disk that you boot off of, and then it begins loading all of the Windows stuff off the CD-ROM. But in this case, the installer is kind of running within an application in the firmware. And yeah, the first time I saw this happening, I was surprised because I didn't know this system would work like this. And right as I was talking about how the application was running within the firmware, what it did do is it apparently exited the firmware and is now actually running the installer software right off the CD here at full screen. So this is basically the standard Windows NT setup. What we're going to do is, okay, so I think we just hit enter to continue. So right off the bat, setup has detected the IDE CD-ROM, and it did also detect our SCSI controller. Comes up as a Symbios Logic or whatever. Yeah, okay, so we're going to hit enter to continue. I guess I have to read this. Okay, where are we? F8, I agree. Okay, so here we go. Windows thinks that I'm running a Motorola PowerStack, and the display is also... okay, this makes so much sense now. So it says the display adapter is also Motorola PowerStack, which just happens to be a Cirrus 5400 series display, which may explain why I never got anywhere on these systems until I happened to put that exact video card into the system. So that's interesting. So there's other options here. I suppose some of these may have worked, but yeah, the fact that it actually says PowerStack and the type of video card in the same line, that leads me to believe that, yeah, that was a hardware thing that I needed to resolve before. So that's fascinating. Anyway, no valid system. This is fascinating. I'm not sure what we're supposed to do here. Okay, we're going to try something else first. Okay, so what I've done is I've rebooted the computer. What I'm going to do is kind of an old trick that I will also explain later in the video. We're going to go to our environment setup, define environment variables, and we're going to reset environment variables. So it doesn't really matter. I think we're just going to immediately drop all of these, and I'm going to hit OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a reboot of the computer again. So we'll wait for that to happen. Okay, so after the quick reboot, I'm going to go back into my hard disk setup. And here we go. Designate system partition. partition 1, partition added successfully. So this is where I got that strange error message the first time around. So I think this somehow still screwed up before. So what we're going to do now is we have to relaunch the Express setup. So we're just going to verify that Windows NT setup starts loading again. Okay, yes, here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause the video and wait this out, and I'll resume when we reach the same point we were at just previously. All right, so we're resuming right at this point where we're accepting the configuration that it found. I'm going to hit enter on this part. Here we go. This is what we were looking for before. So it actually sees that our FAT partition is going to be the new C drive. And what you want to do is obviously move your mouse or your cursor down to where it says unpartitioned space. This is where we're going to actually install the operating system. Now, what we want to do is in the unpartitioned space, we're going to create a new partition. Right now, it says that the maximum that it can allocate is 8 gigabytes. But I think what I'm going to do is just give it 2 gigabytes. Because I think it's going to format this, and it's probably going to take forever, and I don't really want to wait that long. And 2 gigs for this test is good enough. So what I'm going to do is hit enter. So our installation target is going to be drive D, which is currently unformatted, new partition. Now, the interesting thing here, it's going to, no, actually, I wonder if, I might be rambling. I'm just going to hit enter. Here we go. I can't remember if there was something strange about whether or not you should start with the FAT file system or go directly to NTFS. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try using NTFS. So we're going to just hit enter here. And okay, so it's gonna just take a minute to do this formatting, so I'll just resume the video when it completes. Okay, so the hard drive is formatted, and setup installs the location /WinNT. We're using the defaults. Hit enter. We're going to hit escape to skip this port, this part here, because we don't care. I thought I told it to cancel. Oh, okay. So it looks like the installation is now proceeding. Please wait, we'll set up copies files to your hard disk. So yeah, what I can hear right now is it's reading off of my CD-ROM drive and installing on the files. And I'm assuming this is probably going to take a little while, so yep, I will basically pause the video here and it'll pick up when the setup is complete here. Okay, so it looks like the initial file copying part is done. We're going to hit enter to restart the computer now. So what's nice is the installer already did all of our boot loader stuff there. So I will cover later in the video what happens when your battery forgets all of that information, though. Okay, this is what I was talking about before. When you select using NTFS, it actually makes it as FAT, and then it does the conversion to NTFS after the installation files have been copied over. So that's what it's actually doing right now. So I think after it did the NTFS conversion, it did also initiate another system reboot. So we're just waiting for it to come back up. Now it says there it's already NTFS, so that's exactly what we're looking for. All right, so I think we've basically just booted into the next setup process here. Well, I'll just put in my name is and enter. CD key. Let me see if I can remember how we do this. Okay. Licensing mode. I think we're just going to go with the default here. I don't remember exactly what I do. Per seat? Oh, I guess so. Computer name is I'm gonna call it Motorola. We're not gonna use a domain controller. Password. No emergency disk because I don't care. Some standard stuff here. This probably isn't going to really matter too much because I'm going to do a demo of a system that already has a bunch of software installed. So we might as well just do some of these defaults just to show the actual installation process. Wired network. Am I connected to an ISDN? Oh, no, I'm not. This is where we would install the IIS, which gives us like the HTTP, FTP Gopher. My demo that I do later on in this video will already have all of this, so I might just not bother with installing it right now. Oh yeah, okay. My network card is 3Com Etherlink ES, TCP. Sure, why not? Why not? And go for it. Yes, I do have DHCP. And this is just a networking side. Okay, it's starting to move faster now. You know, one thing I'm kind of curious about is if I can win nuke myself on this operating system. It might be something that I eventually have to try because that would be hilarious. Okay, we don't care. Just going to use the defaults. Next. I think it's bringing up my network interface right now or something like that. Okay, so Motorola workgroup. I think we're almost done here. Okay, sure, why not? Cirrus compatible display adapter, sure. So previously when I was trying this display adapter, it really didn't like anything beyond 640 by 480, I believe. So we're going to leave it like that. Although I think I did have it set to more colors in my my other hard drive that I already have this on. So seriously? You know what? Let's just leave it at 256. It's good enough for Bill Gates. It's good enough for me. So you can see from the setup dialog, it's copying from E drive in a folder PowerPC. So yeah, on the Windows NT server CD, I think it's got like 4 different architectures all on that one CD. So that's pretty neat. And D drive, of course, is where the operating system is stored on account of C drive being 10 megabytes. So I don't know if this partitioning deal would be the same on MIPS and Alpha. It's possible, I think, because when we were looking at the Motorola firmware before, we noticed like it had that ARC thing, and that's, I think, something that I've seen on non-x86 systems doing their bootloader or whatever the hell. So I think I actually remember seeing something like that on my SGI. So yeah, I think it's just the way that other non-x86 systems did things. But at this point, I'm just kind of rambling, so it's not dead silence as you watch my screen. So I will continue to randomly make up facts on the spot. But I think we're probably almost done here. Okay, so it looks like we're ready to go. We're going to go ahead and restart the computer. And I'll probably just pause the video and resume it when we're close to getting into Windows. All right, so we are now at the login screen. I think that was the right password. Time is invalid. We don't care. Should drop us into the desktop momentarily. So yeah, we're getting into the familiar screen here. Welcome to Windows NT. Did you know that we have a start button? Yes. Shut up. Okay, so I think we're ready to go. Let's go to properties. Okay, so down here, yeah, it thinks that we're running on a power stack. So this kind of goes with my suspicion that the board that I'm using is kind of like an early version of the power stack. Either that or the ID of the board was overwritten when I installed the Windows NT firmware, which I believe actually came from the Power Stack download part of Motorola's FTP site or whatever. So I don't really know. There's not really a whole lot of information available on these systems, so it really could be anything. But let's take a look inside here. So the C drive, yep, is pretty much just this one little directory with a couple files in it. And then D drive, which is where the actual Windows NT lives. And we've got all of our nice little files there. And then my CD-ROM, I've still actually got the Windows NT. Oh, yes, okay. So we don't really need that. Floppy drive detected, which is good. So right off the bat here, we really don't have much of anything installed. This is pretty much kind of what you'd expect for a Windows NT installation, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. Standard setup junk for let's see, different services we can set up. Yeah, I don't know. Going to the control panel. And let's see. So yeah, as we noticed in the earlier setup, it did automatically detect our onboard SCSI controller. So that's pretty neat. We can use SCSI devices if we wanted to. This is I guess, drivers, device drivers. I don't need to worry about that. I don't have any sound cards in this system, so there's no multimedia. That would work. So this was just what we were looking at before. And yeah, I didn't install any additional stuff in here. What we're going to do is I'm going to basically end this particular portion of the video where we talked about the installation. And we're going to jump over to the hard drive I did my original install onto, which was basically the same process, but I think I also installed Service Pack 4. I think it was that or Service Pack 3, because that's pretty much at the very end of the PowerPC support for Windows NT 4. So I did install the latest available Service Pack for the PowerPC, and I did actually install the Internet Information Server, which we skipped this time because I didn't want to have to wait for it to complete. So I do have IIS installed. I do have Mac file sharing as well on the original hard drive for this. And I demoed that a while back when I first installed, and it's pretty neat having like my old Mac PowerBook connect to the Windows NT hard drive. So. But yeah, that's basically how we install Windows NT on the PowerPC. And throughout this entire process, I never had power removed from the system. So every time it rebooted into the firmware, it would auto boot back into Windows NT. And what I'm going to do is we're going to skip ahead to what happens on this system when your battery is dead and you remove power. So anytime I pull the system out to play with, I have to go into the firmware and I have to actually manually create the bootloader settings and also like clear a bunch of the old variables and stuff like that. So yeah, it's a big pain in the ass, but it's included in this video for anyone who might be in this exact same situation so they know what to do. So yeah, there's nothing else we're going to show in this default install. We're going to jump ahead into looking at my my original installation for this system. Okay, so for this last part of the video, what we're going to do is demonstrate how I would normally boot this system when it's got the dead clock battery. So I'm going to be booting off of my original Windows NT install with the software I've already got on there. So when you turn the computer on, it takes you to the Windows firmware thing here, and it gives you these messages that the NVRAM is out of date and whatever crap like that. First thing I think we need to do is go to Setup, Environment Setup. Define environment variables, and then go to reset right here. We want to set our default media path for IDE, and then we want to click these things, and then we click OK. Now this might require me to reboot, but before we do that, I'm going to try defining my boot manager in here. So add boot selection. It'll be ID hard drive. The first partition will be partition 1, which is the small 10 meg partition, and is the OS partition same as the OS loader? That is not correct. This we change to the number 2 because the second partition holds the actual operating system. The actual directory that we installed to was WinNT40. Root path WinNT, I believe that is correct. The rest of these options I believe should be correct. Let's hit OK. And we go to the boot menu and there's a new option, Windows NT. Let's see what happens. Nope, failed. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a hard reset on the computer, which does not actually remove power from the system. So it should retain the settings that I previously just put in there. All right, so we're back in the firmware. Under the boot menu, we do have our Windows NT option that we just set before. So I'm going to try and load that now. And now we do actually have the Windows NT loader starting up. So it tells us processor's a 604, no L2 cache, system memory 64 megs. So yeah, with that Motorola Windows firmware, when you reset the environment variables, you got to do the system reset. I think it just removes whatever corruption might be in there from the dead battery. So I don't know, but we'll wait for this to finish loading now. All right, so we've reached the Windows NT server login screen here. Let's see if I can remember what my password was. I think I got it. And yeah, we are in. So for this installation, I did put a lot of add-ons on here. We've got like the IIS bundle with all the associated services. I've got like Mac file sharing enabled in here. So if we drop into control panel, so we've got like this here, which this Mac file. I tested this. Oh, it's too busy to complete the operation. Oh yeah, this is Windows. You gotta like give it a few minutes to figure its stuff out first. Let's just look at the properties on this computer. Yeah. So we got PowerPC 604, and it thinks we're running a power stack. Let's see if we open the task manager. Okay, so it looks like the CPU load has gone down. Now let's load it. So I did have this running before. I had one of my old PowerBooks on my network, and I was actually accessing the local volume that I shared. So yeah, I can't really see that. Actually, I think I shared the entire path there, the D drive. And yeah, basically just shows up as a like an AppleTalk file share on there. Yeah, nobody's connected right now because I don't have any Macs online at the moment. But yeah, this is basically AppleTalk networking for Windows NT. And yeah, I really wanted to get that installed on there. So I do have some programs on here. There's really not a whole lot that was available. So I guess under the IIS, I think if we load up the IIS control panel here, it will tell us what we have running. Oh, no, wait. That's the setup. I want to... oh, here we go. IIS manager. So... I've actually got a web server running. I have an FTP server running. I have a Gopher server running. This is fairly neat. And I mean, this operating system is so old that yes, people probably were using Gopher at this time. So yeah. And what we can do is we can load up Netscape Navigator 3. Now, Netscape Navigator, this is not a PowerPC native application. This is actually a 16-bit Windows application. And the reason this is able to run is because the Windows NT 4 for PowerPC does emulate 16-bit Windows applications from x86. So it works, it kind of works. Performance is pretty bad. Now, for something like a web browser, it's not really going to be a big deal, but let's take a look here. We want to go to... oh, come on, really? Whoops. If we go to our local host, we're loading up the local IIS web server. This web server designed for a Windows NT server. So yeah, this is kind of neat. Yeah, this is basically being served locally. And if we also want to go to outside websites, so there is an Ethernet card in this computer, yeah, it is basically working online like you'd expect. And this is my Altexanet site that I keep around to test really old computers like this. So yeah, you can do some limited web browsing here, but yeah, this is not a PowerPC application; it's a Windows application. So because this is pretty basic, it's able to run without any serious problems. I did try other programs, and they were not as nice. Basically, no games or anything. Microsoft Works, this is also not a PowerPC application, but this does work. This is also a really old version, so it's not really not needing a whole lot of processing power. And then we exit out of that. I think I also had... this thing also has like an email server built into it, I think, as well. If I administer a post office, there's my post office location. My mailbox password, if I can really? Nope, I don't remember it. I think that's what came before Exchange, if I'm not mistaken. Like it was, I have this thing called Microsoft Mail running in here somewhere. But there's Windows Messaging. I think this might have been it. I went through so many weird names. Oh yeah, so this is a an email test that I sent to myself. Now, Windows Messaging. I don't know if this is sending through the local email server on this computer. Services. So I do have some sort of email system running on this thing. I guess a really old version of what's known as Exchange now. I guess I have something in here. Yeah, who knows? So basically just ancient email services that Microsoft offered for Windows NT. Let's see. We're going to take a look now at... I have a few other items in here. It's not really any big deal. Like I installed ClarisWorks for fun. I tried installing Microsoft Golf, but it doesn't even run. It basically just gives you a message about running out of memory, but I don't see how that's possible. I think it's the emulator that's having its own memory allocation, maybe, because the computer has enough memory, but the emulated application wouldn't run. And I tried Duke Nukem 3D, and that was a no. It took like an hour to load the first level or something ridiculous like that. But let's take a look at Visual C++. If we go down to the Microsoft Developer Studio here, this is one of the few PowerPC native programs that's available for Windows NT. And I think there's also Microsoft Office. There was a PowerPC version, not ever released though. So I unfortunately don't have that. But this they would have needed to port to PowerPC, because if you want people to develop for your operating system, they would need a compiler. So when we look at like the platform here, the platform was Windows 32 PowerPC. So basically 32-bit PowerPC applications, and we can create a project if we really want. Now, I don't really know how to use this thing properly, so we're not really going to do much, but yeah, we can like compile our application. There's no source file. Okay. Yeah. I mean, this could be neat to play around with, but
I probably would be wasting my time trying to develop a Windows application for PowerPC, because who on earth would ever use it? But yeah, this is one of the very few PowerPC native applications for Windows NT. And I figure someday I'll play around with this some more, but don't really have the time. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Windows NT, really, for this platform, you would only be using it as a server. It really doesn't have that much power for client purposes. So yeah, I mean, if you wanted to do basic web browsing with it, sure, you could do that. But I mean, why would you? Let me see if ClarisWorks actually ran. Oh yeah, okay, this kind of works. And this is also, okay, this is ClarisWorks 1.0, which explains why it's able to run. This is an ancient software. Yeah, from 1993, so. Yeah, so it does that, and this differs from how the alpha does it. On the alpha, it's I think it's some sort of hardware translation that it's able to do for x86 applications, whereas on the PowerPC, it's all like software emulation. And I was kind of reading about this. I think the way the emulation is handled on here, I think Microsoft made a deal with a company called Insignia, who and that company created, I think it's Soft Windows, and they were able to get Soft Windows for the Macintosh working much better than all of its competitors, because they made a deal with Microsoft to obtain Windows source code, and in return, they, like, I guess, offered Microsoft their emulation technology, so they could adapt it to run x86 applications inside of Windows NT for different platforms. Because Windows NT 4 was available for not only PowerPC, but also the Alpha and MIPS. And I think that, well, aside from x86, obviously, I think that's all of them. Can't fully remember, but yeah, the reason these other platforms can run the 16-bit x86 applications is because of that emulation that's in there. So that's basically what I did, or what I read through my research. I'm pretty sure it's accurate. Could be wrong. I don't know. But yeah, so this install of Windows NT, I'll probably just leave on this system, and whenever I'm bored, I'll probably fire it up. And oh yeah, so what I've got here, Internet Explorer. I don't even know if this is a native PowerPC application either. This also might be just under the emulation. And let's see if this renders my website as well. Yep, so it looks pretty much the same as how Netscape loads it. Anyway, I think that covers all of the topics that I wanted to discuss. Yeah, pretty neat system, and I would like to pick up an alpha at some point, potentially for Windows NT 4, or I think Windows 2000, I believe, still actually had alpha support. Yeah. But anyway, thank you for watching.